Welcome to TOEFL Podcast number 2. You're listening to TOEFL Podcast episode 2. I'm Dr. Jeff McQuillan from the Center for Educational Development in Los Angeles, California. This podcast is to help prepare you for the TOEFL listening and speaking tests, as well as other standardized listening tests that you may have to take. Or if you just want some additional English, this is also the podcast for you. This podcast has 4 parts. The first part we read or listen to, I should say, a dialogue or story read at a slow speed. Then we explain some of the vocabulary and expressions in the dialogue. Then we listen to the dialogue again, this time at a regular rate. And finally, we ask a few questions as you might get on the TOEFL exam. Let's get started.
Excuse me, Professor. Do you have a minute?
Sure. I can spare a little time right now. What can I do for you?
I wanted to ask you if it is possible to hand in a draft of the paper to see if I'm on the right track.
I'm afraid not. I have to be fair to the other students, and I didn't offer them the same opportunity.
But I'm really worried about not getting the formatting correct.
Just pay attention to the guidelines I passed out in class. If you want, you can talk to my teaching assistant about it more. To make an appointment with her, talk to the department secretary.
Okay, I'll do that. Thanks.
Now let's talk about the dialogue. The dialogue begins with the student saying, "Excuse me, Professor, do you have a minute?" We use "excuse me" to get someone's attention. It's a polite way of getting attention. "Do you have a minute?" is a question we ask when, again, in a polite way, we want to take someone's time. We want them to spend some time with us, usually to answer some sort of question. So it's a good way to approach a professor at a university who is usually very busy. And it also is a way to find out whether they have time at that very moment to talk to you. So you can say to your professor, "Do you have a minute to tell me what the homework assignment is?" That would be a polite way of getting information. The professor says in the dialogue that he can spare a little time right now. To spare some time means that he has time, that he can take the time to talk to the student. The student then asks or says, "I wanted to ask you if it is possible to hand in a draft of the paper." "I wanted to ask you" is another very polite way of asking someone a question. I wanted to ask you if you could help me with my homework. That would be a polite way of asking, "Can you help me with my homework?" A draft of a paper, when you write a paper for your professor, the draft is usually the first or second attempt that you make at writing. You can give it to the professor sometimes. They will give you comments. And then you write a final version or a final draft. Usually, if it's not the final draft, we call it the rough draft. So if the professor tells you, I want a rough draft of your papers, that he or she means that it doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be the final draft. The student asks the professor if she is on the right track. When we say you're on the right track, we mean, am I doing it correctly? Have I started out correctly so that I can continue? A track, you might know, is where a railroad train, goes down railroad tracks. They're the pieces of metal in the ground that the train moves on. So to say you're on the right track means you're moving in the right direction or going in the right direction. The professor says to the student's request or question, I'm afraid not. This is a polite way of saying no. If a professor says, I'm afraid not, they're just saying, no, I can't do that, or you can't do that. The student is very worried about the formatting of her paper. The formatting is the way that the paper is put on the page. It includes the margins, the space around the edge of the paper. It includes where you should put the title of the paper, what sort of font and size the paper's print should be in. All of these are related to the formatting of a paper. The teacher said that she passed out some guidelines. Guidelines, all one word, are rules or regulations for something. To pass out, the professor said she passed out the guidelines. To pass out simply means to give to students in a class. So I'm going to pass out some papers to you, means I'm going to give you some papers. It's what a professor would do in a class, a university or college class. At many American universities, there are what are called teaching assistants. We sometimes just call them TAs, teaching assistants. Teaching assistants are usually master's or doctorate students themselves who help the professor with various things, homework, correcting papers, that sort of thing. Teaching assistants are paid, not very much, but they're paid by the university to help the professor. It's a way of supporting graduate students in a university. The professor says to make an appointment, the student should talk to the department secretary. At any big university in the United States, there are many different departments or sections. So there's a history department and an economics department. And every department has a secretary, someone who takes appointments and helps you register sometimes, that sort of thing. So the department secretary is the secretary for all the professors in the department. Most big departments have more than one secretary. Now let's listen again to the dialogue, but this time at the regular or native rate of speech, and see how you do. Let's go.
Excuse me, Professor. Do you have a minute?
Sure, I can spare a little time right now. What can I do for you?
I wanted to ask if it's possible to hand in a draft of the paper to see if I'm on the right track.
I'm afraid not. I have to be fair to the other students, and I didn't offer them the same opportunity.
But I'm really worried about not getting the formatting correct.
Just pay attention to the guidelines I passed out in class. If you want, you can talk to my teaching assistant about it more. To make an appointment with her, Talk to the department secretary.
Okay, I'll do that. Thanks.
Now a few questions. Why didn't the professor allow the student to hand in a draft of her paper? Was it A, the teacher didn't have time to look at it? B, the teacher felt it would be unfair to the other students? C, the student did not have the correct formatting for the paper? Or D, the department secretary was not in at the moment? The correct answer is B. The professor thought it wouldn't be fair to the other students. Notice that the incorrect answers all mention some detail from the conversation, but you have to understand the whole conversation to know why the professor said what he said. That's going to do it for today's TOEFL podcast, number 2. Thanks for listening. If you are looking for more English podcasts to help you with listening comprehension, be sure to go to our website, www.eslpod.com. We have a daily ESL podcast, about 10 to 15 minutes per day of English. That will also help you. You can find it in iTunes. It's listed as English as a Second Language podcast. From Los Angeles, I'm Jeff McQuillan. We'll see you next time. TOEFL Podcast is a production of the Center for Educational Development in Los Angeles, California. Copyright 2005. TOEFL is a registered trademark of the Educational Testing Service, which does not endorse and was not involved in the production of this podcast.